Good afternoon, dear trustees, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends of AUB. Welcome to the 154th Founders Day, a day when we pay tribute through our words and actions to the enduring efforts of those whose extraordinary undertakings founded the Syrian Protestant College, a small, mission-oriented university that would go on to become the great American University of Beirut. Normally, this would be an occasion for celebration, for commemoration, but in 2020, facing the most devastating contagion since the 1918 to 1920 influenza pandemic, the plague that has claimed so many of our loved ones without allowing us to bid them a proper farewell or share in the fellowship of men and women in our grief, a year that has seen some of the most divisive political rhetoric across the globe in many a generation, we are hardly in the mood for celebration. In the midst of this plague, we've borne witness to 15 months of Lebanon's dire predicament, with no end in sight. Initiated by massive uncontrolled forest fires in the summer of 2019, fires that devastated large swaths of beautiful mountain forest, followed by a popular uprising that gave brief hope, only to be met by even greater political inertia. And on top of this, the ravages of a severe devaluation of the Lebanese pound, which was compounded by the consequences of COVID-19. Devastating as this all was to the Lebanese economy and to the conditions of people of our host nation, and indeed across the world, nothing could have prepared the people of Lebanon or the community of AUB for the catastrophe of the August 4th explosion, with its destruction of lives, properties, and even dreams of a better future for this beleaguered, small but significant nation. Lacking leaders and short on trust and resources, the explosion pushed so many Lebanese who had previously been heartened by a popular nonviolent uprising, who had clung against all odds to invest their hearts, souls, and destinies in Lebanon, to turn away, to head west and east, and this time to pledge never again to look back at their native ancestral land. The loss of hope can be the last nail in the coffin of a cause or a country. Despair can indeed slaughter hope. Unlike in most movies, and in direct contradiction to the false promises of so many populists masquerading as leaders, the righteous do not automatically triumph over the evil by vanquishing the unjust. Reason can triumph over myths and urban legends, and it should, but only if we learn to distinguish between truth and falsehood, between right and wrong, and apply that knowledge as best we can, as mercifully as we can, to the exclusion of none and to the benefit of all. But what best determines the optimal path forward, and how can AUB best contribute? There's no question this has been a very difficult year for AUB. We have had more than 1,500 departures of faculty and staff, some of whom we could no longer afford to employ, but the majority of whom left Lebanon seeking a better life in a different place. Many of our students, more than 250 of them, have left Lebanon and AUB in the aftermath of the August 4th explosion. We've seen our revenues tumble by more than 70%, an amount that in almost any other university would force far more draconian measures than those we've undertaken, including closures of large swaths of university and hospital operations. Those are steps that we have refused to take. The campus and its residents have patently missed the students, faculty, staff, and alumni who give it life. The campus feels abandoned in these successive waves of pandemic-related closures. This has caused us to reflect a great deal, but also to take decisive actions to save that which makes the university so special, so essential, so necessary for a better tomorrow for Lebanon, the global South, and the world. On this occasion, we asked the students, our future alumni, and a bedrock of our community, to compose essays on Founders Day describing what it is about AUB that is most vital to preserve during these terrible trials. The wisdom and faith of Job, God's most faithful servant, has been required on many days just to get by for some folks, to keep faith in our mission. Today, out of more than 100 essays, 4 brilliant students have distilled what it is about this magnificent and generous seed of learning that is so fundamental to salvaging hope for this region. That hope may seem fleeting at this time, but we trust that it will redound even more vibrantly in the better times that we must purposefully strive to achieve. Before we get to the essayists, I wanted to conclude with a brief comment on one of the Bible's most famous parables, and after the winning essay is read, I will introduce today's speaker, our trustee and alumna, Dr. Huda Zoghbi, a true human treasure, marvel of science, humanism, and generosity. The line, "For many are called, but few are chosen," has been utilized in the Western canon for more than 2 millennia, but it originates in the New Testament in Matthew 22:14. In this passage, Jesus uses an allegory of the wedding feast to explain the difference between the general call to the Christian faith and the salvation of those few who genuinely adopt and embody the message. This is a very complex parable which has been adopted and co-opted by generations of populist leaders, Christians and non-Christians, believers and non-believers, to emphasize the few, a level of exclusiveness in direct contravention to the message itself, a message which I read as an openness to the many and those in between, a presentation of opportunities for inclusion that lies at the core of AUB's mission. We are about the few, the many, and those in between. Despite its deep roots in the Presbyterian missionary tradition, and maybe because of them, AUB transformed its raison d'etre in the first quarter of the 20th century while maintaining its core values. Coalescing in the first quarter of the 20th century on a secular humanist approach to which men and women of all faiths or of no faith are invited to its wedding feast, to dine together at its table of intellectual and spiritual abundance. Today, we have 4 diverse, aspiring, and insightful students determined to leave their own positive imprints on the struggling nation in a globe of peoples hanging on to hope, often by a thread. And these students will show us how the motto, "that they may have life and have it more abundantly," can indeed be realized. That message, that hope, is more needed today than it has been for many, many years. So let us all work together to make that hope a reality by preserving this university and its values, which best embody those hopes and dreams. I now have the pleasure of introducing the winners of this year's Founders Day Student Essay Contest. Third prize is awarded to Joodi Mourhli, majoring in nursing in the Hariri School of Nursing, and Rima Kamel, majoring in psychology in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, for the essay Boldly AUB.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rima Kamel, and I'm a psychology student, and I'm a 3rd place winner. So, far, far above the waters of the deep blue sea lies the campus of the college, where we love to be. With this sacred line commences an invincible connection between every AUB student and his beloved university, armed by loyalty, laurel, and laud. A connection as sturdy as that between a soldier and his cherished country. Ever since its foundation in 1866, AUB has proven to be not only the top educational institution in the Arab world, but also a home that fosters and accommodates students of diverse capabilities and dreams.
On this day, AUB celebrates 154 years of commitment to offering lifelong learning, civic engagement, and leadership opportunities to the youth of the Middle East and beyond. Under the supervision of dedicated and prudent leaders, AUB has strived to build a sustainable and inclusive Lebanon and contribute meaningfully to the global South. For every wish to be granted, we were taught that there has to be an omnipotent fairy of some supernatural sort that helps aspiring protagonists to overcome their challenges and make their dreams come true. However, in the case of AUB, the story proves to be exquisitely and extraordinarily different. AUB happens to be the fairy and the dream of the same tale. Through its gracious financial aid and scholarship programs, AUB has successfully transformed the dreams of countless students to receive world-class education into reality. An armed youth with the power of knowledge they fundamentally need to become the leaders of tomorrow and solve the accumulated conflicts of the past. As young girls with prodigious dreams of reaching the stars, we were oftentimes told not to dream too big of finding a place for our girly ideas in a male-dominant society. However, this misconception was totally abolished the moment we stepped into AUB and were urged to dream big in order to live bigger. With nearly 5,000 female students comprising the overarching 52% majority of the entire student population, AUB has effectively combated the stigma surrounding female leading figures and proved to be an advocate for female global higher education. In fact, AUB has a long history of combating all sorts of stereotypes, marked by the establishment of its famous Title IX framework, aimed at addressing, preventing, and responding to cases of discrimination, so that every student at AUB feels equally comfortable in leading the lifestyle he or she prefers. Furthermore, AUB has always been keen to offer its students a wide platform of expressing their opinions and electing their own representatives through powerful cardinal student council elections.
Through Title IX and students' elections, AUB continues to represent a proud image of an independent and inclusive Lebanon that equally embraces and honors every person's similarities and differences. Furthermore, one of the most important features of AUB is that it doesn't only graduate great scholars at mind, but also great humans at heart. It has been ranked as the most civically engaged university campus in the MENA region for its efforts to engage young scholars in volunteer work to give back to their communities and aid them in times of crisis. For instance, the morning after the catastrophic explosion of Beirut's port took place, AUB volunteers at the Center for Civic Engagement and Community Service launched the Beirut Recovery Project and took to the explosion site to clear out glass from streets and provide psychosocial support for its affected families. Such earnest efforts and prestigious awards have not only proved AUB's meaningful contributions to its community, but also have granted it a distinguished Global South recognition. Despite the exceptional conditions Lebanon is currently passing through, AUB remains determined to accomplish its mission and provide its students excellent education by granting them access to campus facilities and to ensure their physical and mental well-being, while being simultaneously maintaining safety measures. Essentially, the Student Wellness Outreach Center has been attentive to students' psychological needs and focused on helping them overcome their struggles to survive this wheel of misfortune.
These sincere efforts and countless more make us yearn to return to AUB campus and continue to make memories in the hearts of its magnificent place. But until then, let's all rise, express our pride as AUBites, and recite the chorus of our alma mater on the stage. AUB, in thee we glory, make us true and brave. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day.
Second prize goes to Albab, majoring in history from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, for his essay, Maintaining Humanities at the Heart of AUB. I think this makes Aus one of very few multiple winners of this essay contest. So congratulations, Aus. Nice job. Let me give you these first. This is your check. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Albab, and I would like to dedicate this victory to all my wonderful professors at the History and Archaeology Department and to the recently retired Dr. Samir Sayali. As William Earl Dodge Sr. was laying the cornerstone of College Hall on December 7th, 1871, Dr. Daniel Bliss said the following: "This college is for all conditions and classes of men without regard to color, nationality, race, or religion. A man white black or yellow, Christian, Jew, Mohammedan, or heathen, may enter and enjoy all the advantages of this institution for 3, 4, or 8 years, and go out believing in one God, in many gods, or in no God. But it will be impossible for anyone to continue with us long enough without knowing what we believe to be the truth and our reasons for that belief. A radical statement for the time, one whose language would have been tweaked a bit had it been said today. It nonetheless embodies the spirit of tolerance that has been at the heart of this learning institution since it first opened its doors as the Syrian Protestant College with 16 students on December 3rd, 1866. 154 years later, AUB is an entirely secular organization with 9,495 students representing 94 countries, with an administration that remains dedicated to safeguarding tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity. But while AUB may maintain its diverse student body through generous scholarships for domestic and international students, alongside the many exchange agreements it has with universities all around the world, is it merely enough for AUB to be institutionally inclusive, to seek out and attract disadvantaged students both from within Lebanon and from without? If we want to maintain the mindset that tells us that tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity are good and necessary qualities of a modern society, then the answer is no. It is not merely enough to inclusively assemble a diverse cast of students and equip them with the necessary skills to pursue work in one of the many overly popular fields of science, technology, engineering, and medicine. If we want to spread the values and principles through which we arrive at the mindset of inclusivity beyond the walls of our beloved Ras Beirut campus, then we must focus on education, specifically humanities education. By focusing on the humanities, AUB can ensure that the future generations that pass through Main Gate at the beginning of their academic journeys can graduate having become more informed, cultured, critical thinking members of their societies. In a region that values the technical money-making fields of STEM and business, AUB has been a pioneer in humanities education through its general education program, a program that many students scoff at in the beginning, but one that is necessary for their general education. The spirit of this program is not better exemplified than in our Civilization Studies program, or CVSP, which challenges students to grapple with the fundamental texts and ideas of old that have guided humanity through its odyssey to these modern times. CVSP does not merely inform students of these ideas of old, it asks students to critically engage with the texts and formulate sound arguments of their own, whether in agreement or in disagreement. This process of exploration, analysis, and argumentation helps broaden the horizons of students and gives them valuable insight into the human condition. And it is a process that is at the heart of the humanities. By studying history, philosophy, literature, and the rest of the humanities, AUB students can trace the evolution of human society and thought, and can conclude on their own why the liberal ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and the values of equality and diversity are essential to maintaining a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable society. A society that rejects discrimination, violence, and civil strife. But simply believing that humanities should be at the heart of the AUB educational experience is not enough. At a time of severe financial crisis, a time that guarantees budgetary cuts and austerity, the AUB administration should beware the allure of canceling courses with low student enrollment in the humanities. For it is not enough for AUB to maintain and offer courses designed for non-majors. For a truly flourishing humanities education, AUB should allow and encourage more prospective students to major in the humanities and to pursue courses in those fields that are too advanced for mainstream non-major enrollment. Allowing low enrollment humanities courses to proceed in the spring semester is key to maintaining the intellectually stimulating environment that AUB has fostered since its foundation in 1866. Indeed, as a history major who has quite often had the privilege of being enrolled in low enrollment humanities courses, I can confidently say that being under the direct and personal tutelage of my professors has been the most intellectually bountiful and beneficial experience of my academic career. It has allowed me to achieve academic feats in my field that are well above my station as an undergraduate student. Feats that I would not have been able to accomplish had I been a student at a university that employs the auditorium style of teaching humanities courses. And so I say once again, to truly foster the spirit of inclusivity and to contribute meaningfully to Lebanon, the region, and the rest of the global South, I believe that AUB should prioritize the humanities and should protect their low enrollment courses from the destructive amputations of austerity as much as possible, so that future generations of AUB students may have life and have it more abundantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Aus. First prize is awarded to Fatima Kassem Moussa, majoring in English literature, minors in creative writing and translation in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, for her essay, AUB, Privilege to the Less Privileged.
Hi, everyone. AUB privilege to the less privileged. There are things you need to understand about me. My name is Fatima Kassem Moussa. I'm an English literature senior with minors in creative writing and translation. And I would have never, in my happiest dreams, afforded to enroll in AUB without a scholarship. So 3 years ago, when I wrote an email to Dr. Salim Kinaan to consider me as a potential beneficiary of the liberal arts scholarship, I kept it in my drafts for 2 weeks before I sent it. I was that hesitant. What made me any different from anyone else? My name is one of the most common names in the world, and my records don't say anything special. Was I really ready for yet another disappointment? Considering I'm writing this, and I'm saying this right now, I don't get the privilege of surprising you with a plot twist. But I will tell you my favorite part of the story. On the 27th of March of 2018, the day I hit 17, I was informed that I got the scholarship that would allow me to pursue the major of my dreams in the university of my dreams. You might ask yourself, great story, great emotion, but what does this have to do with the question? Skip the gist. What is it about AUB that is important to expand to help build a sustainable and inclusive Lebanon and contribute meaningfully to the global South? But this is your answer. AUB has always been there for people like me, people who wouldn't dare to dream of getting the quality education that I am getting, people who filled their applications and left the part about their parents attending AUB empty, those with great potentials but little income. So, people who keep their emails in their drafts in fear of rejection. So what should AUB ensure that it still provides? Simple. I believe the answer is opportunities for people who deserve a chance. With Lebanon's deteriorating economic crisis, the tragedy of the 4th of August and its implications, it's hard for AUB to continue supporting people in the quantity and quality it used to do so. But think of it this way. How many people aren't getting their chances of becoming the next Waddah Malaib, Zainab Shirri, Hisham Aitani, or one of the names on the long list of AUB alumna with remarkable accomplishments that contribute meaningfully to the global South and the world? How many people are already losing their chances because they cannot afford the education they thought they could in a country of constant variables? AUB's main focus now, more than ever, should be to keep Daniel Bliss's words thriving, that this college is for all conditions and classes of men and women. I hope that when the time comes for the next batch of freshmen and sophomores to enter the gates of Bliss Street for the first time, many of them would read the words inscribed on its gates, that they would have life and have it more abundantly, knowing well that this is what they will have with the support AUB has given them and will continue to give for people like them and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Joodi, Rima, Aus, for your wonderful essays. We are a community with a long history of empowering women, from the first Arab women doctors to train and practice in their homeland to great diplomats, thinkers, and artists among our alumni, and all women who accessed coeducational opportunities at AUB decades before many of the great Western universities admitted them. We still have many miles to go before we sleep, as we recognized by establishing an effective Title IX office and task forces for the lives and careers of our women faculty and for the lives and careers of women at AUB across the university. Before I introduce one of those women whose stellar career was launched at AUB, our keynote speaker today, Dr. Huda Zoghbi, trustee, alumna, scientist, and humanist extraordinaire, I would like to thank our judges for the essay contest, chaired again by David Landis from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, with Naila Al-Aql from the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences and the Office of Student Affairs, Mahmoud Al-Hindi from the Maroon Sam'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture, and Fida Afyouni from the Sulaiman Alayan School of Business. We thank them for their stellar efforts reviewing more than 100 essays and judging them. Thank you. So today we've been talking about values, really, the values that AUB brings. And those values are crystallized perfectly by our trustee, alumna, and leader, Dr. Huda Zoghbi, a great, accomplished, but remarkably humble woman physician scientist. I could take the whole hour and describe only a fraction of Dr. Zoghbi's accomplishments, but I'm going to leave the stage to her. Simply stated, Dr. Zoghbi studied biological sciences at AUB, and she began her medical training in 1975. She actually met her life partner, Dr. William Zoghbi, here at AUB. They both went to the US because of the war, and Huda completed her MD at Meharry Medical College before joining the Texas Children's Hospital at the Baylor College of Medicine as a resident, where she developed an interest in pediatric neurology. Dr. Zoghbi's rise to prominence as the world authority on hereditary neurodegenerative diseases has been remarkable and irresistible, as her lab has unlocked the mysteries of spinocerebellar ataxia type 1 and Rett syndrome, and she is now leading major efforts in the understanding and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So she studies and treats diseases at the two spectrums of life. In the last 4 years alone, we have rejoiced and taken both pride and comfort in Dr. Zoghbi's succession of awards that include her Shaw Prize, the Nobel of the East, the Breakthrough Prize in 2017, the Shaw Prize was in 2016, and the Brain Prize in 2020. Dr. Zoghbi, the virtual podium is now yours.
Good afternoon. It's my distinct privilege that President Khoury gave me the honor of speaking to you today, and I'm also humbled by the responsibility. For although on Founders Day, we rightly celebrate AUB's magnificent history, this particular Founders Day, we must also admit that we are in the midst of many crises. And we are not the only ones. What's true for Lebanon is also true for nations around the world. The coronavirus pandemic, economic collapse, political turmoil, bureaucratic paralysis, natural disasters, and man-made disasters are all around us. As we ponder such calamities, we must remember that we are not without hope, and we are not without help. The AUB community recently showed true Lebanese resilience when it sprang into action after the explosion in Beirut. Your determination, courage, and heroism inspired many of my American friends and colleagues to support AUB's efforts. The real challenge, however, is not the acute crisis, but the long aftermath. Around the world, many countries are experiencing a new wave of COVID-19 infections, simply because people are tired of wearing masks and social distancing. Of course, a new surge of infections only guarantees more severe restrictions. So the question I want to consider today is, how do we keep going? How do we continue to do the right thing when our problems seem so large? I want to share with you some of my own experiences that may be similar to what you're experiencing now, and what I have learned from these experiences. I was born and raised in Beirut. I went to AUB as an undergraduate and wanted to major in English literature, but my mother insisted I study medicine. I fought her on this, but my mother, and all of you know how strong-willed Lebanese mothers are, prevailed. Luckily, I also loved biology, so it was not a hardship to major in it. And when I entered medical school at AUB, I thoroughly enjoyed my medical school classes. I still have my notes from my neuroanatomy class taught by Professor Adel Afifi. His teachings were so clear, I could draw neural circuits based on his descriptions, and I could color them differently based on the directionality of the connections. Neither of us knew it at the time, but Professor Afifi unwittingly laid the foundation for my future. Contrary to what you may have heard about medical school, life was pretty idyllic. Our class of 63 students enjoyed great teachers and very special friendships. And I met Huda Zoghbi, the man who would become the love of my life and the most supportive partner I could have ever dreamt of. But halfway through our first year, the Civil War broke out and our lives were turned upside down. Suddenly, every day was punctuated by bombs and sirens. Those of us who lived off campus had to find safe shelter on campus. I made my home in a closet within the ladies' room in the basement and slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. During our 6-month lockdown, we moved only between the auditorium in the basement, the tunnel, the cafeteria, and the hospital, and a few rooms in the Tamara Sabbagh building. By today's criteria, we were taking a huge risk, but it was a risk that our class and professors, some of whom were Americans, were willing to take because we did not want to lose the year. The administration went along. I guess lawyers and liability were not such a big concern then. Living through this hardship together, our class formed strong bonds, and many of us continue to be friends to this day. That spring, however, my younger brother, who was 16 years old at the time, was hit by shrapnel. This brought home how close to danger we were. My parent wanted my brothers and me to go abroad and visit relatives for a month or two in the summer, expecting that the war would die down quickly and things would return to normal by the time the next year's school year started in October. The airport was closed, so we drove to Syria, and from there we flew first to Europe and then to the US to stay with my sister, who was in Texas at the time. The trauma of the Civil War was still fresh for me. When I heard fireworks for a July 4th Independence Day celebration, I thought they were bombs going off, and I burst into tears. I anxiously monitored the situation in Lebanon, where the conflict was escalating. By the end of September, the airport was closed, and the Syrian border was not safe to cross. I realized that I would not be able to return to Beirut. I started looking for a medical school to transfer in the US, and only then learned that medical schools in the US start in August. All my applications were rejected. I was getting depressed seeing my dream of finishing medical school disappear, and I was not sure what to do next. A friend of the family invited me to Nashville, Tennessee, in an effort to cheer me up. He had contacts at Vanderbilt University, so he took me there. but the answer was no. They suggested I try this other medical school down the road, Meharry Medical College, a historically African-American medical school. I had no understanding of racial issues in the US at the time, but I will be forever grateful to the dean who met with me and let me start school the following day. I was terribly homesick and worried about my family constantly. I felt isolated and lonely and was 2 months behind on my classes. I focused on what I could control, studying hard and learning as best as I could. William transferred the following year and life was more bearable, though we both still considered Lebanon our home. We both excelled at Meharry and we got an excellent education. We spent our 4th year doing rotations at other medical schools as we realized that our chances to get into good residency program coming from Meharry would be challenging. I had done one of my rotations at Baylor College of Medicine, and the chair of pediatrics there, the late Dr. Ralph Feigen, had made it clear he would welcome me as a resident. Every other place I applied made it clear they are uninterested and rejected me, despite my having top scores on the national exams. So I placed Baylor at the top of my list, and on match day, I learned that I would be heading to Houston for my residency. I was drawn to pediatric neurology because I liked the challenge of figuring out the anatomical location of a neurological problem by simply talking to the patient. But what to me was a puzzle in logic was a source of pain to the patient. Even in the early 80s, Texas Children's Hospital was a major center, so it always drew the most difficult cases. Every day I sat with parents and had to tell them there was nothing we could do. Sometimes I would go home at night and cry for these families and for my lack of anything to offer them. I was beginning to seriously question my career choice when in 1983, one particular patient set me on a different path. Ashley was a beautiful little girl who had been perfectly healthy until 2 years of age when she just stopped learning. Not only did she stop learning, she forgot what she had learned and developed problems with motor control, mood, and seizures. All she could do was wring her hands in front of her heart. I recognized this as a hallmark of Rett syndrome because an article describing this rare disorder was published by European child neurologists that same month. By pure chance, another patient came in a week later, also wringing her hands, and I realized there must be more cases. So I got help from the clinic volunteers to comb through the patient's charts, and we identified 6 girls who met the criteria for Rett syndrome. Seeing these girls gave me the push I needed to go into research. I had to figure out what was wrong with them and do something to help. There was a problem though. I had no scientific training. Luckily, during my residency, I had met Arthur Boudet, a renowned geneticist who had himself been an MD, who then went into research. He agreed to take me into his lab, but told me I couldn't work on Rett as a main project. Given the tools we had at the time, it would be nearly impossible to find the genetic cause for a disease that was only sporadic rather than inherited. There were only one in a family. I therefore chose to study a late-onset neurodegenerative disease that runs in families and causes loss of balance and motor coordination problems. It's very rare, affecting only 1 in 100,000 people. And I had met a large Texas family where multiple generations were affected by the disease. I began working in earnest on trying to map the gene, and I soon read a paper about a large family in Minnesota that seemed to have the same disease. It was a study published by an associate professor at the University of Minnesota named Harry Orr. I thought instead of competing, we could make faster progress if we collaborated. I reached out to Harry, and he agreed to join forces. We discovered the gene together in 1993 and have been collaborating ever since. We became good friends, and he has even visited AUB and fallen in love with Lebanon. We now have discovered an approach to therapy that several pharmaceutical companies want to test. In the meanwhile, I kept working on RET, collecting data and samples from over 200 families. There was one disappointment after another. Every time we thought we had a clue about the causative gene, it turned out to be a red herring. Finally, in 1999, 16 years after my first encounter with a Rett patient, we discovered the gene that's mutated in Rett syndrome. It is called MECP2, methyl CpG binding protein 2, and it is an epigenetic factor that functions a little bit like an orchestra conductor. It doesn't play any instruments itself, but it ensures that other instruments, in this case, other genes, play at the right time in brain cells. This opened up a new field of study on the role of epigenetics in brain function. We began to study the role of MECP2 and epigenetics in mice. We created mouse model for Rett, and we also made mice that had an extra copy of the gene to see what happens when there's too much MECP2 rather than the too little we see in Rett syndrome. Then in June 2001, Tropical Storm Allison hit Texas and caused massive flooding in Houston, which is a city at sea level. The storm caused about $15 billion in damages in today's dollars and flooded the medical center. Electrical generators that were in the basements of the building were flooded and power cut out in the middle of operations. Rooms housing experimental animals were also in the basements of building, so thousands of animals drowned. Scientists throughout the medical center lost years of work in a period of 48 hours, and the rains kept pounding us for a week. In the ensuing months, the entire medical center had to reflect on what had happened and what we needed to do to ensure these kinds of losses didn't happen again. Colleagues around the country offered to help us with mice and equipment. All the hospitals built floodgates. Animal rooms are now protected by being behind submarine doors or located on higher floors. Power generators are now on rooftops instead of in basements. The result is that while Houston has had equally serious floods since 2001, the medical center has been protected. It took us a long time to recover from the storm scientifically. My lab alone lost thousands of mice. One of my students saw 4 years of work evaporate overnight. She was despairing. I asked her if there could have been any cages on higher shelves that escaped flooding. She said she did not think so. But I took a flashlight, put on a wading suit, and went down to the mouse room with her and checked the remaining cages one by one. At the end of an hour's search in the nauseating stench, we found one cage with one mouse still alive. This was the only survivor of a line of mice she generated that had an extra copy of the MECP2 gene. My student took that one mouse, nurtured him to health, bred him, and then studied his offspring. These mice had twice the normal levels of MECP2, and they developed a neurological disorder. This led us to predict that there must be people with duplication of the Rett gene who would have a similar disorder, and this proved to be the case. The disease is called MECP2 duplication syndrome, and it turns out to be a common cause of X-linked intellectual disability. We're still studying descendants of that one mouse and have recently used them to test a therapy that could treat the disease. When I look back on these experiences, I'm struck by how often success has seemed to rest on chance. Often these chances don't look like much. A college we've never heard of, a single sick mouse, one more patient we cannot save. If I were to draw lessons from my experiences, I don't think I could do better than to use the words of the great tennis player Arthur Ashe, who expressed his code for living as: start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Let's take the first injunction, to start where you are. I was uprooted from Lebanon and AUB, and after many rejections, I found myself at Mourhli Medical College, 2 months behind in school. I hadn't even heard of Tennessee before that year, but that is where I landed, so that is where I began again. Ashe's second injunction is to use what you have. When I decided to go into research, I didn't have training in lab work, but there was a great geneticist in my department who knew me through my pediatric neurology residency. I then used the skills I had honed in medical school and as a neurologist to learn genetics and lab techniques. It was enough to get me started. In a similar vein, one lonely mouse who managed to survive the flood was enough to provide the foundation for 19 years of research. It was all we had, but it was enough to discover a new disease and test a new treatment for it. Never underestimate the value of what is already in hand, whether it's skills or resources. Ashe's third injunction is to do what you can. I believe my whole research career has been predicated on this principle. I couldn't offer treatment to my patients, but I offered what I could by way of comfort. And then I decided to do more by going into research. The Texas Medical Center couldn't just move all its buildings farther inland, but they could and did reconceive the location of generators and added in multiple layers of protection against future floods. Perhaps an even better example is that of AUB's founder, Daniel Bliss. He grew up poor and funded his education with farming. He studied philosophy at a small liberal arts college in New England, entered the ministry, and was sent to Lebanon to teach school children. His success with the boarding school eventually grew into the founding of a new college that became the American University of Beirut. As Bliss saw it, his mission was to educate rather than just inform. He thought facts are like seeds. They are of little value unless by reason, will, and conscience, they are nurtured into ideals that bear fruit. We are here today because Daniel Bliss quietly set about doing what he thought best, step by step. There are now many thousands of AUB alumni, and many of them have had an outsized impact on the world through their work as diplomats, engineers, writers, teachers, historians, artists, politicians, nurses, doctors, and scientists. Even though solutions to the multiple crises we faced are not going to be achieved by a single individual act, they will not be achieved without all of us acting individually. Step by step, hour by hour, we can make the world a slightly better place. Let us face our challenges collectively, with each of us starting where we are, using what we have, and doing what we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zoghbi, for that inspiring speech, one that will live long in the memory of all of our community. If I could ask the deans, provosts, and the attendees to please rise for the playing of the alma mater.